We're getting started with our Facebook Live in just a moment. Until then, you can look at this pretty picture by Elizabeth Gould. Thank you for joining us for the Life and Art of Elizabeth Gould Facebook Live, a part of the Her Natural History campaign from the Biodiversity Heritage Library. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for those that have joined us so far. We're getting ready to start our Facebook Live on the Life and Art of Elizabeth Gould in just a moment. This is part of the Her Natural History campaign put together by the Biodiversity Heritage Library, and we're excited to take part. We'll get started in just a moment. Until then, you can look at this pretty pheasant of some sort. Thank you for joining us for this look at the life and art of Elizabeth Gould at the Smithsonian Libraries. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So hello, my name is Erin Rushing. I'm the Outreach Librarian for the Smithsonian Libraries, and we're here today at the Joseph F. Coleman III Library of Natural History to talk about the life and art of Elizabeth Gould. This is part of the Her Natural History campaign organized by the Biodiversity Heritage Library, which encourages libraries and cultural heritage institutions around the country to celebrate the important contributions of women in natural history. And I am joined today by Leslie Overstreet and Allie Newman. Leslie is our curator of natural history rare books, and Allie is our reference librarian. And I'll actually be turning this over to them for the most part. I just wanted to welcome you and also let you know that we will be taking questions and look forward to your comments in the comments section. If we are not able to get to your question, we are happy to come back and answer it later. So please don't hesitate to leave us a comment. And then we'll go ahead and get started, shall we?
Welcome back to the Cullman Library. We're delighted to have you here again with us. The Cullman, I should just note briefly, is the library within the Smithsonian, one of 21 branches that takes care of about 15,000 books published before 1840 in the natural sciences. Every book we have is meant to be used, whether here in the reading room, in person, or online through the Biodiversity Heritage Library. We scan books every day and they get mounted on your websites. I'm going to introduce Allie and then turn it all over to her. She's been with us about 2.5 years now and is diving right into the collections. She has an undergraduate degree in linguistics from the University of Kansas and 2 master's degrees, one in library science from the University of Glasgow in Scotland, and the other in material culture and the history of the book from the University of Edinburgh, also in Scotland. And she has a strong interest in the illustration technologies of the hand press period and into the 19th century. So that's in large part what she's going to be talking about today. Allie?
Hello and welcome. As Leslie mentioned, I'm Allie Newman, the reference librarian here at the Cullman Library, and I'm really excited to share some of our beautiful collection with you. So today we're talking about Elizabeth Gould, a chronically underrepresented female bird artist in the 19th century. And we actually have an image, a portrait of her here in one of the reference books that we have in the Cullman with one of her favorite little subjects. Elizabeth Gould was born in 1804 in Ramsgate, England, to a relatively well-to-do family. She was educated in everything from foreign languages to music to drawing and watercolor painting, which came in handy later in her life. She was a governess by age 22 to a member of the English government, to that person's daughter, actually, and she described her life as miserably wretched dull during that period. But during the same period, in 1828, a man named John Gould was on the rise in his ornithological career. He had recently been made head preparator and preserver at the Museum of the Zoological Society in London, and he was actually introduced to Elizabeth through one of her brothers, a fellow taxidermist. They were married in 1829 when Elizabeth was 24 years old. Now, John Gould, as the conservator and preparator at the Zoological Society, was in charge of stuffing and preparing skins. And one day in 1830, a whole bundle of skins from the Himalayas came to him from his colleague N.A. Vigors, a fellow ornithologist. Familiar with the work of Edward Lear, who was an artist and lithographer, famous at the time and very well known for publishing a large book of lithography on parrots, John Gould said, "Hey, why don't we do a large lithography work on all of these beautiful and hitherto unknown skins from the Himalaya?" He accordingly brought that idea to Elizabeth to discuss with her, and Elizabeth didn't quite understand why he was speaking with her about it. She said, "But who will do the pictures on stone?" And John Gould said, "Why, you, of course. This is a biographical fact attested by several authors." And she did it. She taught herself lithography, and the book called A Century of Birds from the Himalayas was released in 1831. And it was actually published between the years 1831 and 32, which I will get back to shortly. This is the process known as lithography, and different from the engravings or woodcuts of prior centuries, this is actually a technique by which the art was drawn directly onto the stone with a wax pencil. And if you get really up close to some of these lines here, you can see that they have sort of a crayon quality. They're not very hard and very thick. They're a bit fuzzy. And because of this fuzziness and the direct transfer from art to stone, it's thought that lithography is much closer to the hand of the artist and a more true medium. As I mentioned, Elizabeth actually taught herself lithography. She knew how to draw and she knew watercolor, but she was starting from scratch here. John Gould was a great ornithologist, but a relatively average artist, which is why he tasked Elizabeth with doing these lithographs. Unfortunately, despite the fact that she was the one who lithographed every single plate in this book, her name does not appear anywhere on the title page. She is briefly thanked in the introduction, but the extent of her credits come down here. Drawn from nature and on stone by E. Gould. So it's not even her full name. Also during this time, she was pregnant when she was teaching herself lithography, and she actually gave birth to she and John's first child to survive infancy right after the first part of this work was delivered to subscribers. So if you will join me at the next book. This is one volume of a 5-volume set called The Birds of Europe, published between 1832 and 1837. Now, I noted that it's a between date. It's not published just in 1832 or just in 1837, and it's because these books were put out in parts. People would subscribe to have these parts delivered part by part by part. In the case of Birds of Europe, these parts consisted of 20 plates each, and they cost £3 in 1832. That was roughly equivalent to $350. These were very big undertakings, these large plate books, and it was hard for authors and artists to pony up the money right up front to publish a 5-volume set of this size. So they turned to a sort of crowdfunding by putting it out by subscription. And the subscribers were everyone from the King of England to the King of Prussia to Audubon himself actually subscribed to the Birds of Europe. as well as the Zoological Society and the Linnaean Society in London. By this time, John Gould had actually enlisted the talents of the aforementioned Edward Lear. He actually taught Elizabeth the finer points of lithography. This is one of his lithographs. You can see it's about the same as the lithograph that we saw earlier. It's a bird on a largely white background with a little bit of scenery. In this period, in the 1830s, they were still kind of following the tradition of what we lovingly call dead bird on stick, where you have just a stuffed or stiff specimen just sort of existing in an empty plane. And if you're familiar with the works of Audubon, he kind of turned that on his head and put the specimens and the birds in their natural habitats. Lear was also doing this, although this is kind of a pared down example. And unlike Elizabeth in her earlier works on the birds of the Himalayas, he was very careful to sign every lithograph that he made. Sometimes they're even more obvious than that. And you can see down here, E. Lear del et lithog. Del means delineated. It means that he drew the picture that the lithography came from. And lithog means that he also drew the image on stone. Now, Birds of Europe is a very beautiful book, despite the fact that a number of birds in Europe are kind of brown, kind of black and white, but we love them nonetheless. But it's in this book that we begin to see Elizabeth playing more with the living species. She and John actually went to Europe, not only to explore the natural history collections of other countries, but to observe these birds in the wild, actually alive and doing what they do. So here we have a family of woodpeckers where one of the parents is actually feeding the babies a little caterpillar. I'm unsure of the species of the caterpillar, but it's such a sweet scene, and there's actual personalities to the birds rather than just a stiff example. And perhaps based on Edward Lear's influence, she also began to sign her lithographs occasionally. But you'll notice that there is an extra letter in front of the E. Gould. That is a J for John. And you can see down here, drawn on nature and on stone by J and E. Gould. John said that he was the one who drew all of the images for this work, and Elizabeth only lithographed them. But in reality, evidence exists in archives and in original drawings that John made small corrections, if any, to drawings by Elizabeth. But he was much more concerned in putting out the final product than he was adequately representing his wife. Even Edward Lear does not get a credit on the title page. Perhaps that's why he was so careful to sign his name in such big letters. At the same time as Birds of Europe was being published, Gould also published this one-volume work on the toucans, or the Rhamphastides family. This was put out in 1834, still in parts, but over just 1 year because it was a bit shorter. And in this, you can clearly see the influence of Lear coming through in Elizabeth's images. Not just because the birds are so big and bold and just, they're beautifully pop off the page, but because this sweet scene where he's kind of sleeping, he has his beak tucked into his wings, it's very sweet. And you can kind of see in this black here, if you move the camera up and down, the toucans themselves are actually a little bit shiny. And this was a technique that she actually picked up from Edward Lear in using egg white to make the birds shine a little bit more. It might be a bit more obvious on this fabulous toucan by Edward Lear himself. And again, here's a big example of his signature. Edward Lear was very careful and really loving in the way he depicted his birds, and they're always making eye contact with the viewer. It's kind of disconcerting
too
sometimes.
Much eye contact, it seems like sometimes.
Yeah, that looks like the dog you came home to and is expecting pets. But the bird almost comes out of the page. And Edward Lear has the bird sort of staged among all of this greenery. And through that, Elizabeth really grew her craft as an artist by taking elements from her childhood education in drawing and watercolor, combined with Edward Lear's influence, she was able to draw the most amazing creatures. And I will flip to the further end of this book right now. This is actually 2 volumes bound as one. The monograph of the Ramphastides, which is the toucans, and monograph of the Trogonidae, which are trogons, one of which is the quetzal.
And I will take this opportunity to thank the Biodiversity Heritage Library for providing links in the comments to all of these works, where you can see them online in their entirety.
Including this amazing
fold-out. Really fantastic.
Yes, the way the Biodiversity Heritage Library has this digitized, the tail actually extends down into the next row of images, which I find amusing because it's true. It comes right out of the book. And I can just imagine Elizabeth having the conversation with John saying, well, of course it has to be this long. It won't fit on the page. What am I supposed to do? Curve it around its head? But this is the fabulous male quetzal with this beautiful folding paper attachment with the female. And you can see here, she's signed it. And it too is sort of nestled in a bit of greenery. And this greenery became really important to Elizabeth and her art in her later years. During the time that this work and The Birds of Europe were published, she gave birth to 5 more children. So not all of them survived through infancy, unfortunately. So during that time, she became very, very attached to her family, obviously, because there were tragedies happening. Also during that time, John Gould received more skins from somebody that you may have heard of. A certain Charles Darwin returned from his voyage on the Beagle and gave John Gould a whole raft of bird skins from the Galapagos Islands as well as other travels throughout his journey on the Beagle. Now these finches are in fact Darwin's finches. They are the finches that he used as inspiration when he wrote his Origin of Species. And indeed, as usual, Elizabeth is not credited anywhere on the title page. John Gould, who described these birds as the ornithologist, shares credit with Darwin on the title page. But Darwin does say in his introduction that the lithographs are executed with that admirable success which has attended all of Mrs. Gould's works. So, at least he's praising her. During this time also, John James Audubon praised her. It said that she really represents the birds very well, despite the fact that they're not always going out into nature and observing them firsthand. These are a bit stiffer than the ones that we were looking at earlier. They do still incorporate a bit of the background, kind of subtle, but that's because they were done in a bit of a hurry. During this time, John had organized an expedition to Australia, on which they were to leave in 1838. This was his most ambitious project yet. He had seen a few bird skins from Australia in his job at the Zoological Society, but because they were so strange, he thought, boy, let's just go and find them. Luckily, Elizabeth Gould had connections in Australia. A couple of her brothers had set up a farm in New South Wales, so John was able to use that as a base. But Elizabeth did not really want to go to Australia. As I mentioned, she had had trouble with her children. Her mother was sickly by that time, and one of her children was also not doing very well. Documentary evidence as well as archival evidence shows that she really did not want to go on this trip. She was emotionally very upset, and it's heavily implied that John actually almost dragged her onto the boat. But they made it to Australia, and this is one volume of the magnum opus of Elizabeth Gould. This book is one of the Birds of Australia, published over 1840 through 1848. It's 7 volumes, and it contains many, many plates, 861 actually. As I mentioned, Elizabeth's brothers lived in New South Wales, so she was able to set up a base there. And as well as in Tasmania, she and John found a place to stay with the Franklin family who were actually high up in the government of Australia at that time. Through spending time there, she did ease her emotional difficulties somewhat, but she wrote many, many letters back home expressing her worry about her family and her concern that she might not be able to see her mother or her sickly child again. Still, she also wrote about amusing anecdotes in Australia. She called John a great enemy of the feathered tribe for his collecting of specimens. Not only did he observe them in the wild alive, but he also brought some home so that way he could sketch them in the comfort of being under a roof, which sounds lovely when dealing with the Australian weather. This is a lovely example of one of the plates by Elizabeth at this time. This is a lyrebird, something that John Gould really said, you know, if there was a bird to represent Australia, it should be this one. It's so fabulous and so big and just fascinating. Unfortunately, Elizabeth didn't go the whole hog with the tail like she did with the Quetzal, but it's still amazing. Further images in this volume include these little guys, which I just think are so sweet. And it shows that during this time, Elizabeth got really interested into painting of plants and flowers. So she wasn't just drawing the birds, but she was actively, even when she wasn't supposed to be drawing the birds, she would go out and collect plants and draw them on her own time. Lots of these drawings still exist and are held by different institutions. But she doesn't actually incorporate all of those drawings into her lithographs, so it shows that she's just drawing for fun and for pleasure and because the beauty of the object to her. Now, as I mentioned, there are 861 plates in this work. Elizabeth only lithographed 84. Unfortunately, she passed away at age 37 of purple fever shortly after giving birth to she and John's 8th child. This was after she and John had returned from Australia, so at least she was at home and was able to see her family again. But it is a tragedy from which John never recovered. He actually named a bird after her, the Gouldian Finch, which is further back in the book. He wrote almost a whole page on why he dedicates this bird to her. He says, "It is therefore with feelings of no ordinary nature that I have ventured to dedicate this new and lovely little bird to the memory of her," being Elizabeth Gould. He praises her contributions to his work and that she came along with him to Australia and worked tirelessly on these specimens and out in the field with him. She got her feet as dirty as he did, and at least he appreciates her within this description of the bird, if not on the title pages where she belongs. But we do hope through showing these books off and through talking about Elizabeth's story that we can bring more of it to light. Unfortunately, despite the fact that she wrote a lot of correspondence back and forth from Australia and from Europe and other journeys, she doesn't really mention her art or how she feels about it. So we can only infer from the way that she executes these birds and their lives, interacting with each other, feeding each other bugs, that she really enjoyed what she was doing. And we really hope that we can honor her memory this way, as well as add her to catalog entries where it is appropriate, which we are actively working to do.
Yes, so we did actually have a question. I encourage anyone who has a question to go ahead and type one into the comments, and we'll try to address it here, if not later after the broadcast. But we did have a question about whether Gould had left her off the title page and left her less credited than he could have because of societal expectations, and would the book have been a better seller if it was written and illustrated in the total work of a man as opposed to involving Elizabeth in the credits?
I don't know that it necessarily would have been a better seller, but it certainly was due to societal expectations. Women were just kind of expected to help their husbands out on beck and call. So being the artist, the family lithographer, or family draftswoman as she's referred to in certain biographies, it was something that she just did. She probably didn't expect to be credited on the title page, but it's just a real pity when she contributed works such as The Lyrebird and Darwin's Finches, for goodness sake, that there's no hard record outside of Darwin praising her work in the introduction that she was the one who drew these finches on stone and was probably one of the first to sketch the image of the specimens. These were probably stiff, sort of dried bird skins, very dead, and she gave them life on the paper.
Yes. So we are just about ready to wrap up. If anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and type them in now. And as I mentioned, if we don't get to them during the broadcast, we'll come back and answer them later. And thank you very much to the Biodiversity Heritage Library for supplying links to all of these books in BHL so that you can flip through them at your leisure and see the really magnificent art of Elizabeth Gould. And just as a reminder, since they're hard to find which pictures are Elizabeth's and in certain circumstances, you can look down at the bottom
for the J and E Gould, although now we have a better idea of who was really responsible for those.
Just a couple more images of trogons because they're so pretty. Like that's one thing that I always struggle with when talking about Elizabeth Gould is trying to focus on the science and the significance, and it is very scientific and very significant, but they're just so pretty, and some of them are just so cute. It makes me happy to work on things like this and to highlight Elizabeth's work.
Yeah, and I do want to point out the beautiful books behind the ones that we're flipping through are continuations of the same title, the multiple volumes of these books that have hundreds of illustrations in them.
And in this one, she also incorporated her signature and John's J into the stick.
Thank you. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments. We really appreciate you spending your lunch break with us. And thank you very much to Allie Newman for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, and please let us know if you have any questions or comments. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.